Putting that executive and that strategic and that business case hat on first is very important. If it's a young company, there are things we can do to position our company in a way to reduce the need to overbuild early. So if we're health tech, do we need to collect health information, protected health information or PHI right now? Often not. But if we don't ask that question, we might just do it and then assume we have to be HIPAA compliant. If we're building that product and growing the business, we can take 6, 18, maybe in multiple years, 18 months, multiple years before we collect that information because we're providing value differently. And the business case to collect PHI is much later. And then the overhead and the cost of becoming HIPAA compliant can be delayed. So there are a lot of ways to approach differently. I'd never, putting my CISO hat on, I'd never advocate for security by default, but it's really looking at those things holistically and seeing if there's a business case. And often there's not.
Are you a scaling SaaS founder? Ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those who don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where closing higher value deals isn't just talking about bigger numbers. It's about solving bigger problems and proving you're worth every extra zero. I'm your host, Jeff Maines. I help B2B SaaS founders like you grow from traction to scale. Here, growth is more than just numbers. It's about crafting a future-proof company, premium valuation, and leaders who build a business of significance while living epic, adventurous lives. How secure is your SaaS company? No, really, how secure? I think about this a lot. It's easy to think that cybersecurity is just an IT problem or a compliance checklist to tick off. Did the thing, got the paper, and we're all good. But in today's threat landscape, that mindset can leave your company dangerously exposed. I think that's more true by the day. In this episode, we unpack why security isn't just a department, it's a culture, a strategy, a competitive advantage hiding in plain sight. You'll learn how to build a meaningful risk management framework, not just identify threats, but understand what actually creates risk in your business. And that's what's most valuable anyway. We'll also dive into the difference between real security and checkbox compliance and why your team's mindset might be your strongest or weakest line of defense. From defending against deepfakes and social engineering attacks to leveraging modern infrastructure as a service and platform as a service tools for smarter protection. This conversation covers what SaaS leaders need to know to stay ahead of increasingly sophisticated threats. Because in a world where AI can clone a voice, even mine, and breach a system in seconds, your best defense isn't just technology, it's education, alignment, and intention. You want to level up your cybersecurity game, empower your team, and align protection with real business goals? This episode is a must listen. Let's get into it. Our founder on Tuesday was Lior Weinstein, fractional CTO and CRO and 3-time founder. Lior shared how founder-led companies can ditch bloated org charts, adopt AI-powered systems, and scale faster without asking for permission. If you're trying to turn your vision into velocity, this one is a must listen. And our expert guest last week was Mike Lander, ex-procurement director turned negotiation strategist. He walked us through how to close higher value deals by better qualifying leads and speaking the language of buyers. If you're selling to enterprise or want to, Mike's approach will help you close smarter, not just work harder. So if you missed that episode, go check it out. Gold in that one. My guest today is Warner Moore. Warner is the founder of Gamma Force, where he helps growth stage tech and health tech companies bake security into their DNA without killing innovation. Sounds pretty cool to me. With a career that spans scaling startups to $1.4 billion exits, Warner knows how to make security a leadership advantage, not a bureaucratic bottleneck. He's built cybersecurity programs for companies ranging from a scrappy 8-person team to 500 plus employee powerhouses, all while helping them stay agile, compliant, and competitive. Welcome someone who turns cybersecurity into a culture of innovation. Warner Moore. Hey, Warner, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Well, you've helped multiple SaaS companies scale up 8-person teams to organizations with hundreds of employees. What inspired you to take all of that knowledge, put it together, and then build Gamma Force?
Shoot, something that always inspired me was taking modern technology problems and applying them at scale. So, like early days of the internet. Earlier in my career, the problems I was interested in solving just really needed more scale to solve. So that's really what drove a lot of my focus. Being entrepreneurial at heart, I spent the first part of my career focused on business to business software as a service companies across industries, fintech, insurtech, health tech. And then after a certain point, I was relearning lessons. It wasn't novel anymore. So I decided to switch things up. And that was the impetus behind founding Gamma Force.
Very cool. And what do you see as the missing in the way that most growing tech companies approach cybersecurity, and how do you help them bridge that strategic gap?
I think it's easy to treat it very tactically, maybe even be transactionally. Like as CEOs, as founders, as executives, we see problems often in the market and that our customers want solved. So if we're at B2B SaaS, our market might expect a certain maturity with cybersecurity. So then we get into tactical mode. It's we have to do this compliance thing. We have to be SOC 2
Right.
and not taking the time to reflect on it. And the challenge is hiring the average security professional. They'll be really good at helping a company get SOC 2 compliant, but they're not necessarily going to step back as a member of the executive team and ask the question, why? Whether or not
Mm.
it even needs to be done in the first place, or ways to position the company, the product, the conversations to have with the customer, the market, to position in a way either to reduce risk, reduce overhead, unnecessary cost, and really just drive the most value out of the security work being done. And that's the approach we take and are impassioned by.
That's good. I think it is really easy to take compliance or certifications just as checking a box. But I think there's a lot that's missed in approaching it that way, especially in today's world. Threats are real.
Threats are real. And my marketing team always wants to talk about FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I always pull them back. It's like we don't create the FUD, we help remove the FUD, right? And stepping
Yeah.
back, thinking about the things we want to do, whether or not we need to do them. And that doesn't change the fact that if we're building technology on the internet, we have countries in organized crime that are really well funded, working 24 hours a day in some cases. And that's a lot of resources dedicating to
Yeah.
breaking into or stealing our stuff.
It really is. And you think about that and just the sophistication and the dollars behind that. They're venture funded hackers, essentially, out there trying to do that, whether it's a ransomware attack or stealing data and selling it or whatever it may be, holding it hostage, releasing it, all sorts of things. Or just planning something inside a network and it's leaking data and you don't even know for months or longer.
It's true. There are a lot of potential risks. And I think as executives and founders, we have the opportunity to really frame it in a risk context. And how I look at risk is three things: asset, vulnerability, and threat. And if we don't have those three things, we don't have a risk. If we don't have something of value, an asset we're trying to protect, with a vulnerability and a threat, it just doesn't work out. That risk doesn't exist. So if
Mhm.
we think of it that way, it's easier to get past being scared, get away from all the noise, and think about this thing we want to protect. Is it worth enough to spend money on protecting it? Or can we do something differently to reduce a threat or eliminate a vulnerability? And
Right.
The doing things securely by default is easier than it's ever been for a modern company. Admittedly, there are a lot of threats, but the things we want to protect the most, our software we're building, the products we're putting on the internet, the data we have, protecting those things with a large scale infrastructure as a service and cloud providers, our default maturity can be way higher with lower capital expense anyway than
Right.
it used to be.
That's a really good point because I remember the days where you had data centers and you order new equipment and servers arrive and they're pulling them out of boxes and sticking them in racks and you hope they're configured right. And now it's a few clicks of a button, servers spin up, and the default security is already there and it's already pre-hardened for our use.
Yeah,
Are
it's
the
true.
defaults good enough though?
We have to be thoughtful, right? And that's really the tricky part is if we assume that's not always going to be the case. I like to say that a big part of security is knowing what we have and paying attention to it. The things we have in a cloud environment, we still have to pay attention to. If we're not getting a little nerdy, if we're not updating the AMIs that our AWS or Amazon services run on, they can be vulnerable. It doesn't happen automatically for a lot of the services. But then again, AWS publishes the well architected framework that is a playbook we can download on the internet right now and follow that playbook and have a pretty darn secure tech platform.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot better than it used to be. What would the tangible business case be if a CTO or CIO was trying to make a case to the executive team for either fractional cybersecurity leadership or going through audits or something like that, or bringing in some specialty expertise, especially when you're talking about industries like fintech or health tech?
Yeah, health tech, I think, is a great example because with healthcare, even being a health tech company, we're not acting as a doctor, right? We're not doing healthcare directly, but we're going to have health information, and that's subject to HIPAA. So compliance is
Right.
often a business driver. I look at three things primarily: compliance, market, what our customers want from us, and then risk. And the risk formula is what I illustrated earlier. Usually it's a combination of two of those things that create a stronger business justification. And then if technology is our product in our business, considering not only what the market wants from a bare minimum operational perspective, but also what we're offering, what our product and service is, and how we can position that product in a way to actually deliver security as part of what we're doing. It's very contextual, but that is a way that security can even be used to drive competitive advantage and differentiate in the market. So putting that executive and that strategic and that business case hat on first is very important. If it's a young company, there are things we can do to position our company in a way to reduce the need to overbuild early. So if we're health tech, do we need to collect health information, protected health information or PHI right
Hmm.
now? Often not. But if we don't ask that question, we might just do it and then assume we have to be HIPAA compliant. If we're building that product and growing the business, we can take 6, 18, maybe in multiple years, 18 months, multiple years before we collect that information because we're providing value differently. And the business case to collect PHI is much later. And then the overhead and the cost of becoming HIPAA compliant can be delayed. So there are a lot of ways to approach differently. I'd never, putting my CISO hat on, I'd never advocate for security by default, but it's really looking at those things holistically and seeing if there's a business case. And often there's not.
Interesting. And I think that happens a lot as founders will look at security and is it a now problem? Is it a later problem? Are there any risk to delaying it? If it's not a now thing and we say, okay, we're in a couple of years, we're going to go down the HIPAA path, but not today. Are there any risk in doing that? Or how should they think about that?
Great thought, Josh. There are a few different things. I think earlier in a company's stage, simplifying it as how much money do we have in the bank? What's the value of the company? If we're a pre-revenue seed stage startup that might have $500,000 in the bank, we're focusing on either product market fit or growth, getting early customers on board. And it might cost us $300,000 to become compliant in some way. That 300,000 is just going to de-risk what's now 200,000 in the bank, right? So there's early maturity where it gets really simple. It's the company's not worth much, or we don't have that much money. We're not going to spend a whole lot of money to protect it. Across all industries and all businesses, there's a certain point of scale where there's built-in risk. And I usually simplify it as maybe Series A or 100 headcount or 10 million revenue, some combination of those elements. And then the question is, okay, maybe we'll invest a meaningful six-figure sum into building some security maturity, a security program, but that's relative to the valuation of the company and the revenue. That business risk is built in with more scale.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is security, or I guess certifications, is it, you mentioned 300,000, that seems really high. Is it coming down in price, or is it something that is going up? Or how should companies look at that and budget for it over time? What are you seeing in your world?
I'll say it depends. I often think about SOC 2. There are a lot of things in the market where they're cheap, right? You might have a tech company that's, I call it SOC in a box, that says we can get you SOC 2 compliant and just spend a little bit amount of money and this magic happens. It's all automated. Sometimes folks can do it relatively cheap through a combination of tools and finding less professional auditors, CPAs, who will sign off on it. That doesn't happen. And that's the whole point of the AICPA, the accounting professional organization, is they are subject to professional standards. But the low end of the market has figured out a way to crank out some of those things relatively cheap. But the challenge is, I'd suggest and always say that if we're looking at it that way, the business case is probably weak. And we should step back and
Hmm.
consider, can we renegotiate, position differently, delay? Because I'd much rather not do that and have to rework it a couple few years down the road. It usually creates more work and costs long term. The more professional approach is usually a combination, either in-source, outsource, professionals, security experts, compliance experts, an auditing firm, usually building or introducing capabilities. Those can be technical controls, business process, operational process. So it depends on what the organizational headcount looks like, how much overhead they're willing to assume in-house. Are you willing to take 40% of your capacity across your team and dedicate it to a compliance initiative? Maybe not. That's the knob and dial and professional services versus in-house.
Sure.
And then there's the audit itself. And usually I suggest budgetary numbers on the low end, 150,000, but more practically 300,000. And
Okay.
some compliance requirements, such as high trust, that are very prescriptive and have additional cost associated with it through the way the audits are conducted. You have to license content and things like that.
Right.
Those can be upwards of 500,000 plus. So it's really expensive. And doing it well is more expensive, but the total cost of ownership and the value is higher. TCO is lower, the value is higher over the lifetime of the program. But if the question is this worth it, I'd suggest we probably shouldn't be doing it yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. When companies grow fast, their need to evolve security is constantly changing. Or I guess their approach to security is changing, or should be, as they look across team structure, new tools that come in, and whether those are authorized or unauthorized, and then just the processes around those. At what point should they be thinking about having a CISO or a fractional person come in and help oversee some of that growth and make sure that security is keeping up with where they are as a company?
If the business can support it financially, and that's a number one, right? Spending money on things that can be afforded or don't add value just never makes sense.
Sure.
So affordability is one. And then it's a combination of risk. If our market, if our customers are asking for it, it helps to have somebody who can take that functional view and security, but that horizontal strategic view in the organization and the business, and help navigate that circumstance and negotiate the right conversations with the right stakeholders, both internally and externally. The value of that cannot be overemphasized. I take calls all the time, with early stage startups and have quick conversations and help them rethink it. Because if we commit to things, overcommit, and a young company, we want the business, right? We're going to sign these contracts. And if we overcommit, those are things that are very difficult to renegotiate later. So we might have operational overhead built into our agreements that adds a whole lot of OPEX, or the cost of operations, more overhead than we'd have otherwise. If it's coming up a lot, it's worth getting someone on board. I'd say like full time and building out a capability usually is those three things I mentioned before, a combination of headcount, funding, or revenue, where there are ways to start building capabilities in different functions of the organization where maybe some of your people ops or HR folks have a responsibility for access control, or the engineering team has some responsibility for how security is built into the software and products we build. So there are ways to start to build maturity and right size it that can scale without throwing a bunch of headcount on it at it. I always I'm disappointed to see companies that overinvest and when they don't
Mm.
have that strategic view. I, I I've been talking with some folks in the industry just over the past month where a technical leader built operational capabilities for security where there were weak business justification, about 4 or 5 headcount. Some of the best folks, they're all people I'd hire in a second. But now they're reorging and downsizing that function because that business justification was never there. But why have spent that money for the years to get to that point and then damage reputation when it comes to that hiring? So those are things that could have been avoided.
Ready to dominate your market and skyrocket your revenue? Dive into Small Fish Big Pond, delivering a world class business that swims circles around competitors. This book is packed with powerful marketing and leadership insights guaranteed to transform your business and operate world class. Small Fish Big Pond delivers proven strategies to sharpen your marketing message, deliver unmatched value to your clients, and guide your prospects' buying journey to one inevitable conclusion: that your company is the only solution for them. Inside, you'll find step by step frameworks and time tested growth principles to attract your ideal clients, convert them, and then turn them into your passionate brand ambassadors. Grab your copy today in print, ebook, or audio at smallfishbigpond.com or on Amazon. Plus, remember, every book sale supports charity. All profits go there. Always have, always will. So dive in and make a difference. So, what size company should be thinking about, if not full time, then virtual or fractional CISO or CTO?
When there is enough money in the organization to think about maturing operations, or the market is demanding it,
Okay.
those two things are big. I don't think about investing in certain operational capabilities more inwardly focused until certain points of scale, right? We can use part-time controllers, we can use part marketing agencies and things like that. But at a certain scale, well, we're spending enough with these agencies where it makes sense to consider having some capability in-house. But there's a lot of point before that where it might not make sense. But we're thinking about the operational capabilities we're building in our businesses along the way. So if we're thinking about it, it's worth asking about security in that context of the maturity of the company. And then if
Sure.
the market is asking for it, that's the biggest thing I'd emphasize is worth asking the question how we should position security in the companies we're building.
And that makes sense because if you think about health tech companies, a lot of times HIPAA compliance is something that's just table stakes. In order to even get into companies, you have to have a certification. And sometimes high tech, high trust, I mean, could be either one, but it's just that's a barrier to entry for others, but it's table stakes if you're going to play in that world, depending on the kind of data you're storing.
That's so true. Taking health tech and HIPAA as your example, there are many early stage startups that I work with in health tech where we're building earlier security and privacy capabilities because it's non negotiable.
Right.
Now, a B2B SaaS company that's more a broad business problem and isn't dealing with sensitive data or
Sure.
accessing other people's systems or networks or applications, that's much later. And
Yeah.
that's a great illustration for business justification of security.
Sure. A lot of smaller companies, as they're growing and hit that growth stage, it's all about speed. They want to move fast, break things. How do you balance that speed with safety and engineering great products that don't have a bunch of security flaws?
I love that. It's not mutually exclusive. It hasn't been for a long time. I think the first time I spoke of DevSecOps on stage was around 2008 at DevOps Days Amsterdam. And with modern companies where we're automating code deployments and automating changes, and we can build security into that automation. Security doesn't mean that we have to slow down. In
Hmm,
fact, doing it in a modern way can just as much increase speed to market.
I think so. And yeah, there's so much to be on the lookout for. And we have it in our own organization where it seems to happen to new people. They maybe it's because they update LinkedIn, new job, and they get a text from me, the fake me somewhere out there from some random number saying, "Hey, this is Jeff. Can you do me a favor?" And then they reply back and, "Hey, I want you to buy some gift cards and send them to me." And so we've actually made that part of our onboarding now of this is likely to happen, and it is. If anything seems weird, ask, pull up Slack and say, "Hey, is this really you?" And because it's not. But actually thinking about that in advance and preparing team members like, "Hey, social engineering is real. These are the things that are likely to happen." And then when it happens, they're like, "Hey, it happened to me." And they knew what to do and they knew how to handle it. So it wasn't something that was a surprise. Are there some ways that we can continue to educate team and build culture where it is more open, it's okay to ask questions, and that they feel really confident, that they feel well equipped, I guess is a better way to say it, for what's coming in this new world, especially with AI?
I love that example, Jeff. One of the stronger organizations I've worked with, we built a really good awareness program where everyone in the company, across the company, knew to raise a hand if something didn't feel quite right. And knowing that it's better to slow down and ask the question, and our customers appreciate it. It's not inconveniencing everyone, it's helping protect them. So,
Right.
building that security culture and helping people understand the small things they can do every day is so important.
And that's true. Customers as well. We had a situation where somebody called in pretending to be, it was an ex employee, called in pretending to be a customer wanting to get access to a system. And that's probably one of my biggest fears is our client success team is super high touch. They're really engaged. They want to serve, they want to help. And it's balancing that with security and then taking a step back and going, "Hey, wait a second. How do we validate this person?" and thinking about that, but our clients really appreciate that. And I think that's something every company should be thinking about is how do you serve and do really well and provide high levels of service, but also provide something that is secure and that there is an easy way to validate, make sure that this is really on the up and up.
Something we don't always talk about is things we see, but we don't always consider implementing in our organization. And to illustrate, right? So, say our business is working with health information or working with financial information, and we need to talk to the end customer. And we might have a team that's focused on working with the customer information, some of it being more sensitive. So if the team can access that information in bulk, that introduces risk. And not
Mm,
even them doing something criminal, just maybe their account stolen or somehow they're used as a way to get access to it. If they're capable of getting bulk access to that data, there's a challenge. So
yeah.
there are ways we can make that more difficult, simply restricting the access, or we can think of it more from a business process perspective. So if I'm that customer and I'm calling up one of our team members, we the team member asks something only I know, and it could be a password, it could be a more obscure information. Mother's maiden name probably isn't something we should use anymore, but just to
Right.
illustrate. And unless that information is provided and accurate, where our team member enters it in, they can't access the record at all. So
Yeah.
we can think of not only from a security or technology perspective, but how can we build resilient business processes that make it easy for our team members to do the right thing?
I like that. Making it easy, I think, is really key. And I think it was last year, two-factor authentication was required for a number of different types of accounts, specifically related to financial accounts. What's your take on that? Is that good enough? Or should, companies be thinking about doing something else? Or just is that kind of the minimum now? Is doing two-factor authentication for access to anything sensitive?
There are some things that all people in an organization should do, and it's because they're low cost and low effort and high value. Things like encryption, things like
Sure.
multi-factor authentication. Stuff like that used to be expensive and difficult. Now it's really
Yeah.
easy for us to do it, and that's a luxury. So the reason why we do MFA is so if somebody steals our password, they can't just instantly get access to the account. They need to steal something we are, a biometric data, or they need to steal something we have. It could be a fob or a one-time password is essentially making our phone something we have when we're using the software version of that.
Right.
Our passwords are going to be stolen.
Yes.
So making it difficult for anyone to do anything with those passwords once they have them is super important.
Makes a lot of sense. How do we align security with our overall mission as a company? How do founders communicate that so that it really supports the mission and doesn't hinder the process of delivering value to customers and to society?
Hmm. I think it depends on the mission, right? So many companies say they're mission based, but their mission is to make more money faster. When we were building a health tech company, Cover My Med, scaled it to over $1 billion before we sold it to McKesson. Our mission was to help patients lead healthy lives. We were helping with a administrative process for paying for medication, prior authorizations. So really deep in the industry, really unsexy business problem, but our mission was to help people lead healthy lives. And part of my narrative to the company for a long time, up until we sold, was that if we had a breach, we would almost guaranteed go out of business. Our customers could stop using us and move on.
Yeah.
And we expected, and my team and I estimated that a cost of a breach would be about $20 million.
Wow.
And so if we have a breach, we're going to inhibit our ability to help people lead healthy lives. We're probably going to go out of business. So that's going to impact all of us. We're not going to have jobs anymore. So that's often how I look at it. Like in the context of the mission, because we're in healthcare, we need to help keep our patients' data secure. And other cases, it can look a lot of different ways, right? If we're manufacturing things and we have a security breach and take down operations, if our mission is to manufacture things and our operations is taken down, well, but missions are important. Mission and values, I think there are a lot of ways to make money. And those are among the ways we differentiate, create competitive advantage, and get people passionate about the things we're doing.
Yeah. In a world of remote work, which I mean, we're seeing the battle of remote versus office, but there's still a lot of remote work out there. AI on top of that, rising threats. What do you see as maybe some of the biggest cybersecurity shifts now, and then what's coming in the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, we're always in security talking about the latest thing, be it Gen AI or quantum computing. Quantum computing's been something we've been watching for years now because it's theory. The theory is that quantum computing will make the physics for breaking our encryption algorithms trivial. Like
Right.
right now, AES 256, it would take millions. I forget the math. It's a long time,
Longer
millions
than
of
I'm going to be
years.
alive.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're not
millions
going
of
to break
years.
that
Yeah.
based on current first principles. Quantum computing could change that, but it's all
Yes.
theoretical. I always, there, for most of us, there's opportunities to do the basics better. And if we're not doing the basics well, doing fancy stuff isn't necessary. Pay attention to the things we have, take care of it. Use encryption, use MFA, patch your systems. Once we're really good at the basic stuff, then we can worry about the fancy stuff. But deepfakes are real. That we need to be especially vigilant and considerate of how people might manipulate or fraudulently talk to our teams or represent our
Yep.
companies.
And there have been some interesting news stories about that, where CFOs have wired millions of dollars overseas because the CEO told them to.
It
Crazy.
happens regularly. I've been part of incident response and venture capital firms where we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars with limited partners, and it can be very difficult to recover.
Yeah.
That's not even security. If we have good financial controls, we can stop that
Yes.
stuff from happening.
And I think that's important. Security is not something that IT does. It's not just installing patches or passwords or multi-factor authentication. It's good processes. It's making sure that there are checks and balances, and the certifications are the same way. If you look at SOC 2, there are certainly IT controls around that, but it's not that. There's also process controls and making sure that you're running a business that really has those checks and balances in the business process itself.
An example of a business process there are few things that I advocate for universally. It's very contextual. And access control, I advocate for almost universally. And what
Yeah.
access control means, it means the business process for the assignment and removal of access to company assets. And
Yes.
it's the process. It's not a fancy tool or anything like that. If we're a team of five, we can track who's assigned what access.
Right.
And then if they don't need it, we can remove it. And that is something that, done well, provides a ton of security value.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm sure there are people listening who, if you've been in business any time at all, you've gone in to do an audit of users or admins, and you look at it and you go, "Oh, that person's been gone for 2 months." We need to remove that access. And it's some obscure system that was set up several years ago and you forgot all about. And if you don't have those access controls, if the process is not right, it's really easy for that thing to happen.
And if we're a smaller company with all these software as a service solutions, those Google Workspace and Office 365 accounts add up real fast. So
Yes.
we're spending money on things we don't need too.
Yeah. And thinking about that, what is your take on employees getting outside subscriptions or SaaS products or things like that and bringing them into the organization without anybody else knowing about that? Using other resources, a little different than installing maybe.
Yeah, we have fancy programs for that, a third-party vendor risk management, right? And
Yeah,
that's the security hammer to address that nail. The more generally speaking, say we're a modern company. What's our core business and what are the things we want to protect the most? So if we're a health tech company, B2B SaaS, we're building software. We're a modern company, so we're on an infrastructure as a service, maybe even some platform as a service. So PaaS, IaaS, and the data that we want to protect the most is being processed, stored and transmitted in those systems we're building, the as a service systems. If we are operating in a modern way, we can limit the places where we store and transmit the stuff we want to protect the most. When it comes to most everyday business stuff, it's usually not the highest risk data in an organization.
or
So
shouldn't be.
we I like that we're using as a service solutions because I don't want information stored on computers,
Yeah,
on laptops, on computers sitting around in people's homes and offices and coffee shops. Now we'll encrypt them so we don't have to worry about it if it's stolen, but with a modern company operating in a modern way, those as a service solutions, as software, I don't worry about too much because the stuff we want to protect the most, we have more sophisticated business process and tools that we built to protect it.
that's a great answer. The founder is listening today and maybe they're feeling a little bit stretched between growth and governance. What's the first step they can take today to build a more secure, mission aligned business?
Growth and governance, right? If our market is large businesses, we might be slowing down growth by not being able to navigate pre-sales, post-sales with vendor management programs with our clients. So if we are seeing friction because of our inability to talk to our security maturity, that might be slowing growth. But back to your core question, it's always going to be the table stakes stuff, right? I think about where the information I have and want to protect the most is, and what are the things we're doing to protect it. Are only people who need to access it the ones that have the access? Do we require multi factor authentication? Is the information that we want to protect the most only able to be stored and processed, worked with in more secure platforms? If we can't wrap our heads around that stuff simply, it probably means we have more risk than we need. And
Mm,
honestly, if we're thoughtful about it, it doesn't have to be complicated or expensive.
so good. Where can people learn more about you and about Gamma Force online?
Been a pleasure today, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me. You can learn more about Gamma Force at gammaforce.io, and I'm always available for a conversation. Hit me up on LinkedIn, Warner Moore, and mention SaaS Fuel. So I know to accept the invitation and always happy to chat with anyone.
Awesome. We'll make sure and link that in the show notes. So great having you on the show. Thanks for being on SaaS Fuel.
Been awesome. Thanks.
Thanks again, Warner, for coming on the show and sharing your journey and insights. You can learn more about Warner and Gamma Force at gammaforce.io. As always, all links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at saasfuel.com. And of course, check us out on YouTube as well. It's at Champion Leadership. We have full video episodes so you can see what all happens around here, plus training, shorts, outtakes, lots of stuff over there for you on YouTube. Thought leaders share. Share this episode with someone in your circle who loves turning ideas into action. It'll give you both something to talk about and to run with. Everyone who shares this week gets an exclusive cheat code for real life, including Control Z for bad decisions and Alt Tab for awkward conversations. And there are times where I could absolutely use those. I would be sharing this episode a bunch. I don't know about you. How do you make your customer service feel human when it's powered by AI? Next week, we sit down with Danny Tomset, CEO of Unique, whose digital human avatars are reshaping customer interactions at the emotional level. That's amazing. And then after that, Chris Daly, a neuromarketer and conversion optimization expert, breaks down how psychology based testing can turn your website into a revenue generating machine. I will see you next time. And as always, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/saasfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.
Let's go!